Marcus Johnson had always believed that respect was earned, not given. At 34 years old, he had worked his way up from a junior analyst to a senior financial consultant at Meridian Capital, one of the most prestigious investment firms in downtown Chicago. His corner office on the 23rd floor overlooked Lake Michigan, and his annual salary of $150,000 reflected his value to the company. Marcus took pride in his reputation. Colleagues respected his sharp analytical mind and his ability to close deals that others couldn't. He had a way of reading people, understanding what made them tick, and using that knowledge to his advantage. This skill had served him well throughout his career, but it had also made him somewhat arrogant. He believed that his track record spoke for itself and that anyone in a position of authority should recognize his worth. Immediately, the trouble began on a Monday morning in September when Marcus received an email that would change everything. The message was brief and to the point. There would be a company-wide meeting at 10 o'clock to introduce the new regional director. Marcus barely glanced at the name mentioned in the email. Sarah Chen would be taking over the position that had been vacant for 3 months since the previous director had retired. Marcus rolled his eyes as he read the announcement. Another outsider brought in to shake things up, he thought. He had seen this pattern before. New executives would come in with grand plans and unrealistic expectations, disrupting the workflow that had made the department successful. In his mind, he was practically running the place already. His clients trusted him. His deals were consistently profitable, and his team looked to him for guidance. When 10 o'clock arrived, Marcus made his way to the main conference room with the casual confidence of someone who knew his place in the hierarchy. He had intentionally arrived a few minutes late, a subtle power move that he often employed to show that his time was valuable. As he entered the room, he noticed that most of his colleagues were already seated, their attention focused on a woman standing at the front of the room. Sarah Chen appeared to be in her early 40s, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit that suggested both professionalism and authority. She was speaking about her vision for the department, outlining strategies for growth and efficiency improvements. Marcus found himself scrutinizing her appearance and demeanor, looking for signs of weakness or inexperience that would confirm his suspicions about her qualifications. As Sarah continued her presentation, Marcus began to form his opinion. She seemed polished enough, but he wondered what real experience she had in their specific market. Had she ever closed a deal worth millions of dollars? Did she understand the delicate relationships that needed to be maintained with their high-net-worth clients? From where he sat, she looked like just another corporate climber who had talked her way into a position she wasn't qualified for. During the question and answer session that followed, Marcus watched as his colleagues asked respectful questions about Sarah's background and plans for the department. He noticed that she answered each question thoughtfully, demonstrating knowledge about the industry and specific insights about their market. Despite this, Marcus remained skeptical. In his experience, anyone could sound knowledgeable in a prepared presentation, but real leadership was tested in the trenches of daily business operations. After the meeting concluded, Marcus returned to his office and immediately called his closest colleague, David Martinez, who worked in the cubicle area outside the executive offices. David had been with the company for almost as long as Marcus and shared his perspective on many workplace issues. "So, what did you think of our new boss?" Marcus asked, settling back in his leather chair. David was more diplomatic in his response. "She seems qualified. I looked her up before the meeting. She has an impressive background with some major firms in New York and Los Angeles. Her track record shows consistent growth in the departments she's managed." Marcus dismissed this information with a wave of his hand. "Track records can be manufactured, David. What matters is how she performs here with our clients and our market conditions. I'm not impressed by fancy credentials from other cities. This is Chicago and we do business differently here." The conversation continued for several minutes, with Marcus expressing his doubts about Sarah's ability to understand their unique business environment. He complained about the company's tendency to hire outsiders instead of promoting from within, pointing to his own qualifications and experience as evidence that internal candidates were being overlooked. As the week progressed, Marcus found himself paying close attention to Sarah's interactions with other department members. He observed her meetings with various team leaders and noted the changes she began implementing. Some of these changes involved new reporting procedures and client management. protocols that Marcus found unnecessary and disruptive. The tension began to build when Sarah scheduled individual meetings with each of the senior consultants to discuss their roles and performance. Marcus's meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon, and he spent the days leading up to it mentally preparing his arguments for why the department's current operations were already optimized for success. Marcus had convinced himself that this meeting would be his opportunity to establish dominance in their professional relationship. He planned to make it clear that while Sarah might have the title of regional director, he was the one who truly understood how to generate results in their market. He believed that once she understood his value to the company, she would defer to his expertise and give him the autonomy he felt he deserved. The stage was set for a confrontation that would ultimately prove Marcus's assumptions about respect and authority to be dangerously misguided. His confidence, built on years of success and positive reinforcement, had created blind spots that prevented him from recognizing the changing dynamics of his workplace. As Friday afternoon approached, Marcus prepared for what he believed would be a routine meeting with a new supervisor who needed to be educated about the realities of their business. Friday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Chicago beautiful, but Marcus was too focused on his upcoming meeting to appreciate the changing leaves visible from his office window. He had spent the morning reviewing his client portfolio and recent deal closures, compiling what he considered to be an impressive presentation of his contributions to the company's bottom line. At exactly 3 o'clock, Marcus knocked on Sarah Chen's office door. She looked up from her computer screen and gestured for him to enter. Her office, which had been redecorated since the previous director's departure, reflected a modern professional aesthetic with clean lines and minimal clutter. Sarah had positioned her desk to face both the door and the window, creating an environment that felt both welcoming and authoritative. "Please, have a seat, Marcus," Sarah said, indicating one of the 2 chairs positioned in front of her desk. "I've been looking forward to our conversation. I've heard excellent things about your work here." Marcus settled into the chair with the casual confidence that had become his trademark. He appreciated the compliment but interpreted it as confirmation that his reputation had preceded him. In his mind, this was already a good start to establishing the dynamic he wanted with his new supervisor. "Thank you," Marcus replied. "I've put a lot of effort into building strong relationships with our clients and delivering consistent results. I think my track record speaks for itself." Sarah opened a folder on her desk that Marcus assumed contained his personnel file and recent performance reviews. She glanced through several pages before looking up at him with a professional smile. "Your numbers are indeed impressive," she acknowledged. "You've consistently exceeded your targets and your client retention rate is among the highest in the department. I can see why your colleagues respect your expertise." Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction. This conversation was going exactly as he had hoped. He leaned back slightly in his chair, adopting a more relaxed posture that he believed projected confidence and competence. "I appreciate that recognition," Marcus said. "I've been thinking about some ideas for improving our department's performance, and I'd like to share them with you. I believe my experience here gives me unique insights into what works and what doesn't in our market." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I'd be very interested in hearing your perspectives. Before we discuss those ideas, though, I'd like to talk about some changes I'm planning to implement and how they might affect your role." This was the moment Marcus had been waiting for. He had anticipated that Sarah would want to make changes, and he was prepared to explain why the current system was already optimized for success. He had rehearsed his arguments about the importance of maintaining client relationships and avoiding unnecessary disruptions to proven workflows. "I think it's important to understand," Marcus began, his tone becoming more assertive, "that what works in other markets might not necessarily translate to our client base here. Chicago has its own business culture, and our clients expect a certain level of service and attention that takes years to develop." Sarah listened carefully to his words, her expression remaining neutral and professional. "That's exactly the kind of local expertise I value," she said. "However, I also believe there are opportunities for improvement that don't necessarily conflict with maintaining those important client relationships." Marcus felt a slight tension beginning to build. Sarah's response suggested that she wasn't going to simply defer to his judgment, as he had expected. He decided to be more direct in establishing his position. With respect, Marcus said, emphasizing the phrase in a way that suggested he was offering courtesy rather than genuine respect. I think it's important for new leadership to understand the existing dynamics before making significant changes. Some of us have invested years in building the relationships and systems that generate the revenue this department depends on. The subtle challenge in Marcus's tone did not go unnoticed by Sarah. She had encountered similar attitudes in previous positions and recognized the underlying message. Marcus was essentially telling her that her authority was theoretical, while his expertise was practical and proven. Sarah's demeanor remained calm and professional, but there was a subtle shift in her posture that indicated she had registered the challenge. I absolutely agree that existing relationships and proven systems are valuable, she said. At the same time, I've been brought in specifically to identify opportunities for growth and efficiency improvements. That's my job, just as maintaining client relationships is yours. Marcus interpreted this response as weakness rather than diplomacy. In his mind, a strong leader would have either acknowledged his superior local knowledge or clearly established their authority. Sarah's measured response seemed to him like uncertainty about her own position. The thing is, Marcus continued, his confidence growing, clients in this market are very particular about consistency. They don't respond well to changes in how we operate, especially changes that might seem arbitrary or that don't clearly benefit them. I've seen other departments try to implement new systems and the results weren't always positive. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her hands folded on the desk in front of her. Can you give me specific examples of changes that didn't work well? I'd like to understand what you've observed. Marcus realized that Sarah was asking him to back up his broad statements with concrete evidence. He had been speaking in general terms, drawing on assumptions and rumors rather than direct experience. This put him in the uncomfortable position of either admitting that his objections were largely theoretical or doubling down on his position without solid support. Well, Marcus said, pausing as he tried to think of specific examples, it's more about the principle of the thing. When you've got systems that are working, there's risk in changing them just for the sake of change. Sarah's expression became more focused. She had identified the core of Marcus's resistance. He was opposed to change on principle, rather than based on any specific concerns about her proposed improvements. This realization helped her understand how to proceed with the conversation. I appreciate your concern about maintaining stability, Sarah said. However, I want to clarify that I'm not interested in making changes for their own sake. Every modification I'm considering is based on data and designed to address specific opportunities for improvement. Marcus felt himself being maneuvered into a corner. Sarah wasn't responding to his challenges the way he had expected, and he was beginning to realize that she might be more formidable than he had initially assumed. His next response would prove to be the beginning of a series of mistakes that would ultimately cost him everything he had worked to build. The tension in Sarah Chen's office had reached a critical point. Marcus Johnson found himself in unfamiliar territory, facing a supervisor who wasn't backing down from his challenges or deferring to his experience. His usual tactics of establishing dominance through subtle intimidation weren't working, and this realization was making him increasingly uncomfortable and defensive. Marcus decided to abandon subtlety and take a more direct approach. He shifted in his chair, adopting a posture that was more confrontational than professional. The confident smile that had characterized his earlier demeanor disappeared, replaced by an expression that bordered on condescending. Look, Sarah, Marcus said, deliberately using her first name without the courtesy of a title. I think we need to be honest about what's happening here. You've been brought in from the outside, and that's fine, but you need to understand that this department has been successful because of the people who've been here building relationships and delivering results. Sarah's eyebrows raised slightly at Marcus's tone and approach. She had dealt with challenging employees before, but Marcus's level of disrespect was unusual for a first meeting between a supervisor and subordinate. She maintained her professional composure, but her voice took on a firmer edge. I think there might be some confusion about roles and expectations here, Sarah replied calmly. I was hired specifically because of my track record of improving department performance while maintaining strong client relationships. I'm not here to disrupt what's working, but I am here to optimize and grow our operations. Marcus felt emboldened by what he perceived as Sarah's defensive response. In his mind, she was explaining herself to him, which confirmed his belief that she was uncertain about her authority. He decided to press his advantage further. "The problem with that approach," Marcus said, his tone becoming more aggressive, "is that you're making assumptions about what needs to be optimized. From where I sit, and I've been sitting here for 7 years, things are working pretty well. Our numbers are good, our clients are happy, and we're profitable. Sometimes the best thing new management can do is recognize success and avoid fixing things that aren't broken." Sarah's patience was beginning to wear thin. Marcus's behavior had crossed the line from professional disagreement to open insubordination. She had given him multiple opportunities to express his concerns respectfully, but he seemed determined to challenge her authority in the most direct way possible. "Marcus," Sarah said, her voice taking on a warning tone, "I think we need to step back and reconsider how we're approaching this conversation. I value your experience and insights, but the way you're expressing them is not appropriate for a professional discussion between colleagues." Marcus completely misread Sarah's attempt to de-escalate the situation. He interpreted her diplomatic language as weakness and saw her warning as evidence that she was intimidated by his confidence. This misinterpretation led him to make the biggest mistake of his career. "Appropriate?" Marcus laughed, a sound that held no humor. "I think what's inappropriate is bringing in someone from outside who doesn't understand our business and expecting the people who actually generate revenue to just fall in line with whatever new ideas they want to implement." The room fell silent. Sarah stared at Marcus for several long seconds, processing the full extent of his disrespect and insubordination. She had encountered difficult employees before, but Marcus's behavior was beyond anything she had experienced in her 15 years of management experience. "I think you need to be very careful about your next words," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "You're crossing lines that can't be uncrossed." But Marcus was too far gone to recognize the warning. His frustration with the situation, combined with years of unchecked arrogance, had created a perfect storm of poor judgment. Instead of backing down, he decided to make his position absolutely clear. "Here's what I think needs to happen," Marcus said, leaning forward in his chair with an aggressive posture. "You need to understand that people like me are the reason this department succeeds. We're the ones with the relationships, the experience, and the track record. If you want to be successful here, you need to work with us, not try to impose your ideas on us." Sarah's expression had become completely professional and unreadable. She was no longer trying to salvage the conversation or find common ground with Marcus. Instead, she was mentally documenting his behavior and considering her options for addressing what had become a serious personnel issue. "Are you finished?" Sarah asked, her tone completely neutral. Marcus interpreted her question as surrender. He believed he had successfully established his position, and that Sarah would now understand the reality of their working relationship. His confidence returned, and he settled back in his chair with a satisfied expression. "I think I've made my position clear," Marcus said. "I hope we can move forward with a better understanding of how things work around here." Sarah reached for her phone and pressed a button that connected her to her assistant. "Could you please ask Janet from Human Resources to come to my office immediately? And could you also contact Building Security and ask them to send someone up as well?" Marcus's confident expression faltered. The mention of Human Resources and Security suggested that the meeting was taking a turn he hadn't anticipated. For the first time since entering Sarah's office, he began to question whether his approach had been wise. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked, his voice losing some of its earlier confidence. Sarah looked at him directly, her expression completely professional but unmistakably firm. "Marcus, you've just demonstrated a level of disrespect and insubordination that I cannot and will not tolerate. You've had multiple opportunities to express your concerns professionally, and instead you've chosen to challenge my authority in a way that's completely inappropriate." The reality of the situation was beginning to dawn on Marcus. The meeting that he had entered with such confidence was about to end in a way he had never imagined possible. His 7 years of success at Meridian Capital, his impressive client portfolio, and his $150,000 salary were all suddenly at risk because of a conversation that had lasted less than 30 minutes. As they waited for Human Resources and Security to arrive, Marcus found himself replaying the conversation in his mind, trying to understand how things had gone so wrong so quickly. The silence in Sarah Chen's office was deafening. Marcus Johnson sat frozen in his chair, watching as the full implications of his behavior began to crystallize. The confident, almost arrogant demeanor that had carried him through 7 years at Meridian Capital was crumbling as reality set in. He had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and the phone call Sarah had just made suggested that there would be immediate consequences for his actions. Within minutes, there was a soft knock on the office door. Janet Williams, the Human Resources Director, entered with a concerned expression. She was followed by Tom Rodriguez, a security officer whose presence immediately elevated the seriousness of the situation. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized that what he had perceived as a routine meeting with a new supervisor had transformed into something that could end his career. "Janet, Tom, thank you for coming so quickly," Sarah said, standing to greet them. "We have a situation that requires immediate attention." Marcus wanted to speak, to somehow explain or justify his behavior, but he found himself unable to form words. The presence of human resources and security made everything feel surreal. In all his years at the company, he had never been in a situation that required this level of intervention. Janet Williams had worked in human resources for over a decade and had dealt with numerous personnel issues, but the tension in the room was immediately apparent to her. She looked between Sarah and Marcus, quickly assessing the dynamics of the situation. "What can I help you with?" Janet asked, settling into the chair next to Marcus while Tom positioned himself near the door. Sarah returned to her desk and opened the folder containing Marcus's personnel file. "I've just concluded a meeting with Marcus that involved serious insubordination and disrespectful behavior. I need to document what occurred and discuss our options for addressing this situation." Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out weaker than he intended. "I think there's been a misunderstanding here. I was just trying to share my perspective about the department and express some concerns about potential changes." Sarah looked at Marcus with an expression that was both professional and disappointed. "Marcus, you had every opportunity to express your concerns respectfully. Instead, you chose to challenge my authority, dismiss my qualifications, and demonstrate a level of disrespect that I've never encountered in a professional setting." Janet opened her notebook and began taking notes. She had learned over the years that documentation was crucial in personnel matters, especially those that might lead to disciplinary action or termination. "Can you walk me through what happened during your meeting?" Sarah began recounting the conversation, speaking in measured professional terms that made Marcus's behavior sound even worse than it had felt in the moment. She described how she had initially complimented his work and asked for his input, how he had progressively become more confrontational and disrespectful, and how he had ultimately challenged her authority in ways that were completely inappropriate for any workplace interaction. As Sarah spoke, Marcus felt a growing sense of panic. The way she described their conversation made his behavior sound inexcusable, and he began to realize that he had no defense for his actions. He had been so focused on establishing dominance that he had completely lost sight of basic professional courtesy and respect. "Marcus," Janet said, turning to face him, "do you dispute Sarah's account of what happened?" Marcus struggled to find words that could somehow justify or minimize his behavior. "I may have expressed myself more strongly than I intended, but I was just trying to make sure she understood the importance of maintaining our existing client relationships and operational procedures." Janet's expression suggested that this explanation was inadequate. "Can you elaborate on what you mean by expressing yourself more strongly?" Marcus realized that any attempt to downplay his behavior would be contradicted by Sarah's detailed account. He was trapped by his own actions, and the presence of witnesses made it impossible to deny what had occurred. "I suppose I was more direct than I should have been," Marcus admitted reluctantly, "but I want to emphasize that my concerns were legitimate, even if I didn't express them in the best way." Sarah looked at Marcus with a mixture of disbelief and disappointment. "Marcus, you told me that I didn't understand the business, that I was making assumptions, and that I needed to work with you rather than implement my own ideas. You challenged my authority repeatedly and showed complete disrespect for my position and qualifications." The room fell silent as everyone processed the severity of Marcus's behavior. Janet had dealt with many personnel issues, but the level of insubordination that Sarah was describing was extreme. especially for a first meeting between a new supervisor and an established employee. Tom Rodriguez, the security officer, had remained quiet throughout the discussion, but his presence served as a reminder that the situation had escalated beyond a simple workplace disagreement. Companies called security when they expected situations to become volatile or when they needed to escort employees from the building. Janet closed her notebook and looked directly at Marcus. Based on what I'm hearing, this appears to be a serious case of insubordination and disrespectful conduct. These are violations of company policy that can result in immediate disciplinary action, up to and including termination. The word termination hit Marcus like a physical blow. Throughout the meeting, he had been focused on defending his position and justifying his behavior. But he hadn't seriously considered that his job might be in jeopardy. The reality that his $150,000 salary, his corner office, and his 7 years of success at the company could all disappear because of one conversation was overwhelming. I think we need to be clear about expectations moving forward, Sarah continued. Even if we were to address this situation with something less than termination, I cannot work effectively with someone who has demonstrated such disrespect for basic professional standards. Marcus felt desperation beginning to set in. He could see his career at Meridian Capital slipping away, and he began to understand that his assumptions about his own value and security had been dangerously naive. The confidence that had carried him through years of success was now working against him, having led him to make choices that were destroying everything he had worked to build. Is there any way we can resolve this? Marcus asked, his voice betraying the panic he was feeling. I realize I made a mistake, and I'm willing to apologize and commit to working better with Sarah in the future. The question hung in the air as Janet and Sarah exchanged glances, considering whether Marcus's offer was sincere or simply a desperate attempt to save his job. Janet Williams studied Marcus's face carefully, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus desperate self-preservation. In her years of experience handling personnel issues, she had learned to distinguish between employees who truly understood their mistakes and those who were simply trying to avoid consequences. The distinction was crucial because it often determined whether someone could be rehabilitated or whether termination was the only viable option. Marcus, Janet said slowly, help me understand something. When you walked into this meeting today, what were your expectations for how it would go? The question caught Marcus off guard. He had been focused on trying to minimize the damage from his behavior, but Janet's inquiry forced him to confront his underlying assumptions and motivations. The honest answer was that he had expected to establish dominance over his new supervisor, but admitting that would only make his situation worse. I wanted to share my perspective and make sure Sarah understood the value of the existing systems and relationships we've built, Marcus said, trying to frame his intentions in the most positive light possible. Sarah leaned forward in her chair, her expression indicating that she wasn't satisfied with this sanitized version of Marcus's motivations. That's not accurate, and we all know it. You came into this meeting with the intention of establishing that you, not I, should be making decisions about how this department operates. Marcus felt cornered by Sarah's directness. Every attempt he made to reframe his behavior was being challenged by someone who had witnessed it firsthand. The reality of his situation was becoming increasingly clear. He had no credible defense for his actions. I think, Janet continued, that we're dealing with a fundamental problem here that goes beyond poor communication or a misunderstanding. Marcus, your behavior suggests that you don't recognize or accept Sarah's authority as your supervisor. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus knew that denying it would be pointless, given what had already been documented, but admitting it would essentially be confessing to insubordination that could justify immediate termination. That's not true, Marcus said weakly. I understand the organizational structure. I was just trying to provide input based on my experience. Tom Rodriguez, who had been quietly observing the conversation, stepped forward slightly. His movement served as a subtle reminder that this situation could escalate quickly if Marcus became confrontational again. Sarah shook her head, clearly frustrated by Marcus's continued attempts to minimize his behavior. Marcus, you explicitly told me that I needed to work with you rather than implement my own ideas. You questioned my qualifications and suggested that my authority was theoretical, while yours was practical. Those aren't the words of someone providing input. They're the words of someone who doesn't accept their supervisor's legitimacy. Janet made additional notes in her file, documenting not only Marcus's original behavior, but also his continued attempts to avoid accountability. From an HR perspective, his unwillingness to take full responsibility for his actions was almost as concerning as the original incident. "Let me ask you directly," Janet said, looking Marcus in the eye. "Do you believe that Sarah has the right and authority to make decisions about how this department operates?" The question was a trap, and Marcus knew it. Answering yes would contradict everything he had said during his meeting with Sarah, while answering no would be admitting to insubordination that would justify his immediate termination. "Of course she has that authority," Marcus said, but his tone lacked conviction. "I just think that major decisions should take into account the input of experienced team members." Sarah's patience had reached its limit. "Marcus, stop, just stop. You're not fooling anyone with these carefully worded responses. You spent 30 minutes telling me that I didn't understand the business and that I needed to defer to your judgment. Own what you did." The room fell silent again. Marcus realized that his strategy of minimizing and reframing his behavior wasn't working. Sarah, Janet, and even Tom could see through his attempts at damage control. For the first time since the meeting began, Marcus was forced to confront the full reality of what he had done and what it meant for his future. "I made a serious mistake," Marcus finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I let my emotions get the better of me, and I said things that were disrespectful and inappropriate. I understand that my behavior was unacceptable." Janet looked at Sarah to gauge her reaction to Marcus's admission. Sarah's expression remained skeptical, suggesting that she viewed this confession as too little, too late. "The problem," Sarah said, "is that this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a sustained pattern of disrespectful behavior that continued even when I gave you multiple opportunities to step back and reconsider your approach." Marcus felt tears beginning to form in his eyes as the full magnitude of his situation became clear. His 7 years at Meridian Capital, his reputation as a top performer, his substantial salary, and his entire professional identity were all at risk because of decisions he had made in the span of half an hour. "Is there anything I can do to make this right?" Marcus asked, abandoning any pretense of professional composure. "I know I made terrible choices, but I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can do better." Janet and Sarah exchanged a long look, communicating through subtle expressions and body language. They were weighing Marcus's plea against the severity of his behavior and considering whether there was any path forward that wouldn't compromise Sarah's authority or set a dangerous precedent for other employees. "Marcus," Janet said finally, "even if we were inclined to give you another chance, how could we trust that this kind of behavior wouldn't happen again? You've demonstrated a fundamental lack of respect for authority and professional boundaries." The question struck at the heart of Marcus's dilemma. He wanted desperately to convince them that he could change, but his behavior had been so extreme that any promises he made would seem hollow and self-serving. "I understand why you would question that," Marcus said, struggling to find words that might save his career. "All I can say is that I've learned something today that I should have understood years ago. I've been so focused on my own success that I lost sight of what it means to be part of a team." Sarah stood up from her desk, signaling that the meeting was approaching its conclusion. The movement sent a chill through Marcus as he realized that his fate was about to be decided. Sarah Chen walked to the window of her office, looking out at the Chicago skyline as she considered her decision. The weight of what she was about to do was not lost on her. Terminating an employee was never easy, especially someone with Marcus's track record and tenure at the company. However, his behavior had left her with no viable alternative. "Marcus," Sarah said, turning back to face him, "I want you to understand that this decision isn't easy for me. I recognize your contributions to this company and your value as a financial consultant. Your clients respect you, your colleagues have learned from you, and your performance metrics are impressive." Marcus felt a brief surge of hope. Perhaps Sarah was going to give him another chance after all. Maybe his admission of guilt and plea for forgiveness had convinced her that he could change. He leaned forward in his chair, waiting for her to continue. "However," Sarah continued, her tone becoming more resolute, "what happened in this room today represents a fundamental breakdown in professional conduct that I cannot overlook. You didn't just disagree with me or express concerns about my plans. You challenged my authority in a way that was disrespectful, insubordinate, and completely unacceptable. Janet Williams nodded in agreement, her notebook filled with documentation that would support whatever decision Sarah made. Tom Rodriguez remained positioned near the door, ready to escort Marcus from the building if necessary. The reality is, Sarah continued, that effective leadership requires trust and respect from team members. After what happened today, I cannot trust that you would follow my direction or treat me with the respect that my position requires. More importantly, allowing this behavior to go unpunished would send a message to other employees that insubordination is tolerated. Marcus felt his last hope slipping away. He could see in Sarah's expression that her decision had been made, and no amount of pleading or promises would change it. The career he had spent 7 years building was about to end because of 30 minutes of poor judgment. Therefore, Sarah said, her voice steady and professional, I am terminating your employment with Meridian Capital. Effective immediately, the words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had known this outcome was possible, but hearing it stated so definitively made it real in a way that was almost overwhelming. His $150,000 salary, his corner office, his status as a senior consultant, and his entire professional identity had just disappeared. Janet opened her briefcase and removed several documents. Marcus, I need to review some paperwork with you regarding your termination. Your final paycheck will include compensation through today, plus any accrued vacation time. Your benefits will continue for 30 days, after which you'll be eligible for COBRA coverage. Marcus listened to the administrative details in a daze. The practical aspects of his termination seemed surreal compared to the magnitude of what was happening to his life. He thought about his mortgage, his car payments, and the lifestyle he had built around his substantial income. All of it was now in jeopardy because of decisions he had made in less than an hour. I'll need your company ID, building access card, and any company property you have in your possession, Janet continued. Tom will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings, and then you'll need to leave the building. The mention of being escorted from the building was perhaps the most humiliating aspect of the entire ordeal. Marcus imagined his colleagues watching as security walked him out, wondering what he had done to deserve such treatment. His reputation at Meridian Capital, which he had worked so hard to build, would be destroyed in a matter of minutes. Tom stepped forward, his demeanor professional but firm. Whenever you're ready, we can go to your office to get your things. Marcus stood slowly, his legs feeling unsteady beneath him. The confident man who had entered Sarah's office less than an hour ago was gone, replaced by someone who was struggling to comprehend how quickly his life had changed. Sarah, Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly, I want you to know that I understand now how wrong I was. I hope someday you'll believe that I'm truly sorry for my behavior. Sarah's expression softened slightly, showing the first sign of empathy she had displayed since the confrontation began. Marcus, I do believe you're sorry, but being sorry doesn't change what happened or fix the damage that was done. I hope this experience teaches you something valuable that you can carry forward in your career. As Marcus gathered his composure to leave Sarah's office, he reflected on the series of choices that had led to this moment. His arrogance, his assumptions about his own indispensability, and his complete misreading of the situation had combined to create a perfect storm of poor judgment. The walk to his office felt like a funeral march. Marcus could sense his colleagues' eyes on him as Tom escorted him through the department. Some looked curious, others concerned, and a few seemed to understand immediately what was happening. The whispers and stares were almost unbearable. In his office, Marcus packed his personal belongings into a cardboard box that Tom had provided. His diplomas, family photos, and personal mementos filled the container quickly. 7 years of his professional life reduced to items that could fit in a single box. As they walked toward the elevator, Marcus caught sight of David Martinez, his closest colleague at the company. David's expression showed shock and confusion, clearly unable to understand how Marcus's routine meeting with the new director had resulted in his termination. The elevator ride down 23 floors gave Marcus time to think about his future. At 34 years old, he would need to start over, explain his termination to potential employers, and rebuild a career that had seemed so secure just hours earlier. When they reached the ground floor, Tom escorted Marcus to the building exit. I'm sorry it ended this way, Tom said quietly as they reached the door. Take care of yourself. Marcus stepped onto the sidewalk holding his box of belongings and watched as the building that had been his professional home for 7 years disappeared behind him. The lesson he had learned was expensive beyond measure. Respect is indeed something that must be earned, but it can be lost in an instant through poor choices and arrogant behavior. As he walked away from Meridian Capital for the last time, Marcus understood that his career would forever be divided into 2 parts. Before and after the day he disrespected his new boss and lost a $150,000 job in a matter of minutes.